From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, we'll welcome in K-State's Guy Allen from the IGP Institute here at the university. Guy providing his monthly insight on the international grain markets, centering on the latest World Grain Supply and Demand report from the USDA. Guy will talk about China's enormous presence in U.S. grain export business currently and the likelihood of that continuing into 2021. He'll also comment on the overall decline in world grain stocks as another supportive factor for more favorable grain prices moving forward. Also today on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Cheryl Boyer will talk about some of the new landscape perennial plants that have come onto the market. That and more coming up on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome to our Thursday edition of Agriculture Today. Glad to have you aboard. Well, the USDA every month provides its World Agricultural Supply and Demand estimates on commodity production here in the U.S. and abroad. The grains often get the lion's share of attention there, and boy, did they, coming out of the November WASDE report on Tuesday. We're going to get into in-depth what the numbers had to say as Guy Allen has joined us once again. Guy is the senior economist with the IGP Institute here at Kansas State University, and in that capacity, he keeps very close tabs on what's going on in the grain markets and grain sales internationally. Before we get into the specific grains, Guy, it was a resounding bullish set of numbers for the markets.
Yes, Eric, I think everybody expected it to be supportive, but the extent of that support and the bullishness was quite a surprise, and we saw the markets act accordingly. Now, we'll go through some of the detail, but look, at the end of the day, the ending stocks for both corn and particularly soybeans have become very, very tight, which is quite a change from where we were sitting, say, June, July, where we were looking at very, very burdensome ending stocks, and we're quite bearish, the price situation. We've done 180 on that, and prices have moved in the other direction.
The real stem winder amongst all the numbers, what was going on with soybeans, you say?
Yeah, look, we saw a 40, 50 cent move in soybeans higher. We're at 4-year highs. The question I keep getting asked is, are we going to see soybeans back above $12? I think we're headed that direction. I don't know if I'm brave enough today to say if we're going to breach that level, but things are definitely dynamic and changing in a number of places around the world.
Soybean exports, and we've been talking of these extensively in recent months. Those have been the centerpiece. Is that the driver here?
Yeah, look, the big driver is China, and I think since I've been coming in to talk to you, China's always taken center stage in our discussions, but they continue to buy good amounts of soybeans. And are on track to buy plenty. Notice the USDA still has the China import number for soybeans totaling 100 million metric tons, which would be a record. I did notice last week that the China-U.S. attaché came out with an estimate around 95 million metric tons, lowering that a bit, which that wouldn't surprise me. But it's all going to depend on the recovery of China's meat sector and how that continues to recover, both not only in hogs, but also in poultry, as both those sectors are growing. And as I think we discussed previously, we're seeing not only a recovery in that, but we're seeing a shift in the production paradigm in China, where we used to have over half of those pigs raised in the backyard. It was sort of what I called in the invisible supply chain. Today, all that growth is in the commercial sector, and commercial pigs and poultry consume imported corn and soybeans. Keep in mind, China's second largest corn producer in the world. They're having a bit of production problems with the flooding, and I think their estimates are down maybe 10%. And then always the big question on how much stocks do they really have there, which is always the salient talking point, which we can't resolve in every presentation or discussion that I've done in the last, probably 3 or 4 years. What is China's ending stocks? But soybeans went to new 4-year high. And the other driver on the other side of that is our competing exporters around the world as well,
which are yet to harvest a new crop. It's just being planted. So
that's right.
That leaves, again, the U.S. is in the catbird seat in as far as the lead supplier worldwide now, right?
Well, for the moment, till about March, we're the sole sourcing of soybeans and products around the world. Brazil is so tight in their soybeans, they actually over-exported their supply last year and are now importing a couple vessels of U.S. soybeans to meet their domestic crushing needs. There was a vessel loading last week out of the U.S. Gulf to go to Brazil to meet their shortfall they're seeing between now and when their new crop comes on board. Make that point just to highlight the importance of these USDA reports and stocks reporting, just to have a bit more transparency in the marketplace so that, are we running as a tank half full or is the tank half empty? But, looking at that Brazilian as well as the Argentina crop, we've got an La Nina event at the moment, which has put an increased level of uncertainty over their production. USDA left most of their South American numbers for soybeans and oilseeds unchanged in this report, but after taking them back a bit last month. But we're going to be keeping a very close eye on that. They have caught up quite a bit in their planting progress in the last week down there and increasing their planted acres to a record level for all crops. It's up, I believe, about 1.5%. But the timeliness of that crop coming off both corn and soybeans, as well as the quantity and the volume of that this coming year, is going to be key for the future price of soybeans.
And really, that is what's at interest for the soybean grower here in the U.S. Right now, this country is leading the pack as far as exports. There will be a new crop out of South America. We know that. To what extent, we don't. But it's the question of how much of the current business can the U.S. retain, even as the South American crop comes on.
Yeah. And with the tightness of the world ending stocks, we're going to be watching things very, very closely, not only in South America, but oilseeds coming out of the Ukraine and the Black Sea as well.
Let's shift, if we might, over to corn then, Guy, and what the USDA had to say in regard to stocks and prices. And once more, China is in the limelight as to its imports of U.S. corn as their domestic prices remain high.
Price of soybeans in China is over $20 a bushel. Corn, it's just under 10. And they continue to import quite a bit of corn. Current sales are around 11 million metric tons, sales and shipments to China. The USDA, not surprisingly, moved their number up to 13 million metric tons for China's total corn imports. I still think that's quite understated. I would suggest probably half, if not a little more, of our unknown sales, which are FOB sales, will probably go to China, putting our current sales probably closer to that 14 million metric ton mark. Again, higher than the USDA number. And I'd be inclined to put it probably closer to the about 22 million metric tons or 25 and could climb higher. But again, what's driving that is the livestock sector in China, but also elsewhere in the world. On that export front, we saw the USDA raise Mexico's imports 1 million metric tons to about 17.3 million metric tons. Mexico is, perennially in the top 3 buyers of U.S. corn. Again, what's driving that is the whole livestock sector in Mexico as they grow not only their beef and their poultry and pork, but also their dairy business down there as well.
One of the factors that plays into the corn scene, what isn't happening in Ukraine, where at one point in time, you note, they were expecting a record corn output.
Yeah, previously, earlier this year, the Ukraine was expected to produce a record corn crop. That, I think, slipped away on the back of dry weather. China's not the only buyer of Ukrainian corn, but a lot of the countries in Southeast Asia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan have bought from that area. And probably the best customer out of the Ukraine is Europe. And I think the EU is something we need to keep an eye on going forward. Europe's experienced a bit of dry weather as well, dropping their corn production by about 2 million metric tons. So I think there's a potential to raise the U.S. corn that goes into Europe in this coming year as well. And I think we want to keep a close look or maybe revisit that U.S.-European trade agreement to see whether there's some opportunities in that.
U.S. corn supplies remain tight then, still awaiting the South American crop. So one would have to think that the corn export scene, although it doesn't get as much of the fanfare as does the soybean side, those corn exports are going to be potential newsmakers here, it would seem.
Yeah, look, that's sort of new business. We sort of expected China to be there for the oilseeds and continued growth. But China's purchase and entry into the corn market is sort of new territory for the global market and particularly for China. I think they're trying to sort out a domestic allocation of resource. The tightest resource in China is probably water. I think we're at with corn where we were with soybeans 25 years ago. China decided to open their market for increasing oilseed imports, and they've grown now to be over 2/3 of world oilseed trade goes to China, and that's how they sort of solve their initial tight resource issue. I think food security is their biggest issue, and the last thing they're going to give up is wheat and rice production. China's the biggest producer of both those commodities. But they're at a place now where they want to eat more animal products. They want to eat more meat. They're going to have more feed grains if they're going to produce it themselves or buy more meat. And look, we've seen China have a record import of meat in the last 9 months. It's up about 72% from last year. I think we're at about just under 8 million metric tons, which is I just sort of look at our meat exports as being corn and soybean meal in a different form. So that continues to drive both the corn and the soybean market.
Guy, we've more to draw from the USDA numbers. We need to take a break. If you'd hold on for just a moment, we'll be right back. Guy Allen is with us from the IGP Institute here at K-State. This is Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care positions, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today is back now, as is our guest on this first half of the broadcast. Guy Allen is the senior economist with the IGP Institute here at K-State, and over the last 48 hours or so, he's poured over the USDA's November World Agricultural Supply and Demand estimates for grains. That was released by the USDA on Tuesday. And Guy, what about grain sorghum? Our sorghum exports have done well in the face of Chinese demand in fair part. What did the USDA say there?
Well, look, the USDA really hasn't changed the sorghum numbers themselves. At the moment, pretty much every cracker grain sorghum is going to the export markets. It's priced itself out of both ethanol and the feed rations. We're seeing significant growth in that. We're seeing sorghum premiums now above corn at $1 a bushel, better than $1 a bushel in Kansas, not only for old crop but also for new crop next year's sorghum demand there as well. And as we're all aware, sorghum's falling corn price, and it's benefiting from this good corn demand that we're seeing there as well. Interesting point in sorghum, although we're seeing it as a premium to corn prices here now in the U.S., by the time you get it into China, pay the import tariffs and duties, it's still about an 85 to 90% value of corn domestically in China. So the economics still very much favor that. Also, what we're seeing is while most of the corn imports are being done by state trading enterprises, a lot more of the sorghum and alternative feed grain imports are being done more by the private trade. So the sorghum numbers look very, very good. it's going to be interesting when we get to spring how these commodities compete for planted area. And over the next few months, we're going to see, I think, a lot of dynamics on the relationship between corn, beans, and grain sorghum, as well as spring wheat.
You bet. To wheat, if we might then. Not a great lot coming out of the USDA numbers that would be considered earth-shattering, but more of an affirmation of a relatively good and solid demand out there?
Yeah, the wheat numbers were actually fairly neutral in and of themselves, but when you combine them with corn and soybeans, they're sort of tailing along with this rally that we're seeing, which is good to see. There was a few changes in the wheat by class numbers. Probably, again, looking at China, just wanted to highlight that Chinese wheat imports this year will reach over 8 million metric tons. This is the highest that wheat imports in China have been in 25 years, and which I think is a good signal. They haven't filled up their TRQ estimates since they've joined the WTO, but we're approaching those levels. Interesting thing is imported wheat in China is now cheaper than the price of corn, and we're starting to see wheat work into the feed ration, particularly when you look at the questionable quality of a lot of the Chinese inventory. It's given them opportunity, I think, to manage some of their quality issues of their stocks, as a good portion of that will be going into the feed ration, and then they can bring in better quality wheat. Another interesting dynamic driving this wheat market is China said 2 weeks ago they weren't going to import any Australia wheat this year because of geopolitical issues. Now, Australia is recovering from 3-year drought. They're going to produce about 28.5 to 29 million metric tons of wheat, which is coming off at the moment. It's generally higher quality wheat. If China's not going to buy that, there's plenty of other customers there in Southeast Asia and Middle East that will, but it's actually a good signal, particularly for hard red winter wheat, Kansas hard red winter wheat, as that tends to be the closest substitute for that. And you've got to remain fairly optimistic that 8 million metric tons of imports a good portion of that will come from the U.S.
And it's not just China, though. We must stress the USDA suggests in its report that overall world wheat consumption remains, if nothing else, solid.
Yeah, and one thing that COVID has done for wheat, it's actually increased some of the wheat consumption. A lot of that's been seen in the home baking sort of area. The biggest challenge for the supply chain has been shifting from that institutional demand to more of a retail or a home consumption sort of demand, but they've managed through that pretty quickly. Yeah, overall wheat consumption from flour, baking products is remained very strong through this whole process. I think people staying at home and looking for a bit of comfort food.
Right. Noting, though, once again, that wheat, at least in the near term, the market is benefiting from that spillover support from corn and soybeans. Can that last?
Yeah, look, I'm fairly optimistic that demand's going to be there, and that goes back to the basic livestock demand sector, as people want to eat animal products, whether it's meat, dairy, poultry, eggs, whatever that may be. So I think that demand's going to be longer lasting. I think the potential problem that we're seeing developing is, as people are gearing up in the wake of these higher livestock prices, not only in the U.S. but Brazil and elsewhere, as China's recovering, if China makes a quick recovery, we could see an oversupply or surplus of meat in that market pretty quick. If they don't recover as quickly as we anticipate and continue to import meat and livestock products, then the life of that strength in the livestock sector internationally is going to continue. I tend to come down on the latter argument. I don't think that recovery is going to be quite as great. And as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing a shift in that production paradigm in China to be significantly more commercial. And that drives imports of both corn and soybean meal and feedstuffs.
And there is one particular item that you also mentioned in your notes on this report, some transportation issues, infrastructure troubles in China, and if that's going to be problematic.
Yeah, we have an increasing focus on the supply chain and the food supply chain particularly, and there's a lot of countries and people now, having a different sort of look at their supply chain and particularly their transportation mechanisms. Last week, we saw the container supply become quite tight in China, so much to the point now the shipping lines are shipping their empty containers back to China direct from the West Coast ports rather than sending the containers up country to be loaded, particularly with grains and agricultural products. And that's put a real sort of, I guess, bottleneck or problem in the U.S. container exports, particularly to China. Now, I think they got caught a bit with their containers being a bit out of place. Hopefully that will rectify itself pretty quickly, but at the moment, particularly since it's gut slot harvest, you got grain coming in, you got container shippers trying to load and ship. If they can't get access to their containers, well, that presents a problem. I guess the silver lining in that news is that if there's a good demand for empty containers back in China, they are experiencing some sort of economic recovery, not only in China but globally as well, and that I think is a good signal for the global economy in this COVID situation that we're seeing good demand for finished products. So it's not all bad, but it is a logistical situation that we're going to have to manage through.
Yeah, bears watching. And one final variable here, Guy. It's common to talk about the value of the dollar in grain trade discussions. Has that taken a back seat to tight supplies and robust demand?
Well, if you're outside the U.S., it's something you look at every day. I think one thing we get a bit lulled to sleep is in the U.S., since we transact everything in U.S. dollars, we don't look at the value of that. The rally that we saw a week ago, 10 days ago, it was around the 3rd, 4th of November, the election time, was we saw the dollar drop pretty sharply in a couple days trade. And in the wake of that, we saw an immediate response to U.S. commodity values rally in that. And yes, that's something we need to keep an eye on. The commercial traders watch it pretty closely. I think sometimes by the time you get to the farm gate, the nuances and importance of that relationship sort of get overlooked. But since the election, we have seen a drop in weakness in the U.S. dollar, which has added to the support for commodity prices across the board.
Well, as we close out here, in the final analysis, our grain producers out there should feel pretty good about the state of affairs as we're finishing up 2020.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a different situation than we were looking at just 4 months ago. You know, we've got back to 4-year highs on soybeans. Corn's headed that way. I'm not going to stand here today and say we're going to see $12 corn, but it looks a lot more optimistic than we did a little while back. Yields have been a bit disappointing. We've had some issues, but it's going to be a bit of a fun ride, I think, for the next 12 to 18 months. We're in a tight stock situation, so a little bit of changes in the supply and demand situation are going to move these markets dramatically. So we need to stay on top of our game and very focused and have a marketing plan as we move ourselves forward.
Producers, we would bring to your attention as well that Guy regularly posts his notes and observations on international commodity markets, and this latest edition does focus on the USDA WASDE report out this past Tuesday. Those are good reads. Take a look at agmanager.info. Guy, thanks for covering all of this with us. We always appreciate your time and your input.
Thank you, Eric. Guy
Allen is the senior economist with the IGP Institute at K-State. And you're tuned to Agriculture Today. We'll return after the break with today's agricultural news headlines and more here on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Next up, today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Joe Biden has announced a number of presidential transition teams, including those for the USDA and the EPA, led by a number of former Obama administration officials. President Donald Trump, of course, continues to dispute the election with litigation in the closely contested states. Biden's USDA team is led by Robert Bonney, the current Farm and Forest Initiative Director at the Bipartisan Policy Center's Energy Project. That's according to the Biden Transition website. Bonney served as Undersecretary for Natural Resources and the Environment at the USDA from 2013 to 2017 and worked as a senior advisor to then U.S. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack from 2009 to 2013. Bonney has a connection to the environmental community, serving as the Vice President for Land Conservation at the Environmental Defense Fund. Now, in all, that USDA team includes 17 members. Among them, Jonathan Koppes is the director of the Gardner Agricultural Policy Program and director of the Bach Ag Law Policy Program, both at the University of Illinois. Previously, Koppes was the administrator of the USDA Farm Service Agency under Vilsack. Also appointed to this team, Deborah Eschmeyer, the Director of Global Business Development at the Center for Sustainable Food Systems, Arizona State University. Eschmeyer is the former Executive Director of former First Lady Michelle Obama's Let's Move initiative and Senior White House Policy Advisor for Nutrition. The USDA team also includes Gregory Parham, a former Assistant Secretary of Agriculture for Administration in 2013. Before that appointment, Parham was the acting Assistant Secretary and served as Administrator of the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS. And the Biden team named Patrice Sims to lead the EPA transition team. Sims is the current Vice President of Litigation for Healthy Communities at Earth Justice. Sims is joined on the EPA team by Ken Kopokis, a law professor at American University. Kopokis served as the Deputy Assistant Administrator in the EPA's Office of Water during the Obama administration and helped to develop the 2015 Waters of the United States, or WOTUS rule. That rule has been replaced with the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. Well, voting is open for another election, this one for people to serve on local Farm Service Agency committees that help the FSA make local decisions affecting things like disaster relief and safety net programs. The USDA's Stephanie Ho has more.
USDA has mailed out ballots to eligible farmers and ranchers for another important election.
Voting is now open for the 2020 USDA Farm Service Agency County Committee elections.
That was Farm Service Agency Administrator Richard Fordyce.
Now, through December 7th, farmers and ranchers in eligible administrative areas can cast their votes for who will serve on their local FSA committee.
Committee members serve 3-year terms of office. The local input they provide helps USDA make decisions on what services to provide.
County committees are unique to FSA and serve as a direct link between agricultural communities across the country and USDA.
In order to be eligible to vote, ag producers must participate in, cooperate with, or provide information to an FSA program.
For more information, visit fsa.usda.gov/elections or contact your local FSA office.
Ballots must be postmarked by December 7th. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Quick calendar item here. K-State Research and Extension is teaming up with the Kansas Farm Bureau to put forth several Winning the Game grain marketing workshops over the coming months, and the next of these is this coming Wednesday, November the 18th, at Plains, the community center there. It'll focus on corn marketing, pre-harvest strategies for the 2021 corn crop, a look at the use of cost of production and those strategies, seasonal price trends, and using seasonal flexibility in making those corn marketing plans. That program will run from 9:30 in the morning until around 2:30 in the afternoon. There's no fee to attend if you pre-register, a $10 fee at the door. You can pre-register at any one of these extension offices in Clark, Ford, Gray, or Meade counties. And next up on Agriculture Today, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. Here's Greg Akagi.
Kevin Repke, Regional Director for South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa with the U.S. Soybean Export Council, joins us. And Kevin, during a recent virtual conference, Discussion took place on the Africa Trade Exchange. What were some of the main points during that conference?
It was a 2-day conference, and it was a fantastic event. It's kind of a watershed moment, I think, for USDA as we look forward to expanding our footprint, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, one of the mandates of farmers, especially in Kansas, was for USDA to diversify its portfolio and to get more broad in its approach to customers. We're really trying to skate to where the puck is going to be, and we see sub-Saharan Africa as a market of the future that's really ready for today. It's already one of the largest importers of U.S. wheat in the world, and we could see markets in sub-Saharan Africa, especially Nigeria, really begin to take off and really become their own.
Does that include growth within Africa's feed industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, the entire supply chain. Sub-Saharan Africa already represents about $500 million in poultry imports. Their incomes are rising. Their population is rising. Nigeria alone increases its population about 5 million people per year. So to put that into perspective, that's about, 2.5 Kansas City metro areas per year. And so, these type of demographics and statistics can't be ignored. And it's really impressive to see the type of population increase, income increase, and urbanization, which all bode very, very well for farmers back in the United States and especially in Kansas.
What about freight markets? How does this work into it being container or bulk markets and keeping its focus on Africa?
So a lot of the wheat that goes in already is bulk on vessel. But we're also exploring many opportunities for containerization. Containerization allows for customization of products. It allows for smaller credit terms. It allows for more people and more customers to really develop them as their supply chain develops and grow into their needs, while they may not have the capacity to import the large volume that we may see, say, in the wheat market or in other markets.
Which makes the value of soy very much important for that African customer.
The whole continent is really in a deficit of protein. We're looking at increasing protein consumption in all forms, be it plant or animal-based, in the near future, and doing all that we can to really broaden that supply chain.
Kevin Repke, Regional Director for South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa with the U.S. Soybean Export Council, joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. And this is Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so stay a minimum of 6 feet away from others and stay home if you can. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Agriculture Today is back now, and for your weekly horticulture segment, we've brought in once again a nursery crops specialist with K-State Research and Extension Horticulture, Cheryl Boyer. Cheryl's going to offer an assortment of things to think about as we get into the now late fall and very soon winter months, and do some planning ahead for our home landscaping, perhaps our gardening as well, and what things you might want to look at as far as additional plant material. Cheryl, there's always something new every year. What are you seeing out there that homeowners would want to look at?
Well, good morning, and thanks for having me. You're right. Every year there is something new, and breeders are working behind the scenes in ornamentals to develop cool new genetics all the time. And the cycles are different depending on the crop. So with annual bedding plants, it's really fast. So the number of new varieties that you'll see in the garden center every year is overwhelming. And that's why sometimes you'll see named cultivars that we recommend. They change so quickly. Whereas when we move up to slower growing plants like perennials, we're looking at longer breeding cycles for seeing new things. Shrubs take a little bit longer, and trees are often on the scale of decades for getting new cultivars. So it's always really exciting when we get something new. Some of the things I'm excited about in the last few years on the perennial side of things, there have been a lot of new heucheras, and the common name for that is coral bells. They're a shade plant, and there are a ton of new, really cool varieties. They're a foliage plant, but they do have blooms. So the breeders have really worked on these to get them to be much showier than they have been in the past. And there's a ton of new colors and cultivars. And I know shade guarding is often a challenging part of gardening in Kansas. So look for some of those. You can do a whole display, I think, just of that one plant with the different cultivars and varieties that are available. So that's coming out. We're still seeing new hydrangeas come out. So the last 10 or 15 years, there's just been a slew of new reblooming cultivars. They're almost always looking for plants that are small in stature. So they're short, they can fit in small gardens, they won't overgrow the space that you have, or very narrow trees that can, still give you character, but they fit in a very small space. So we're seeing lots of new ones like that. So it's exciting to look forward to those.
As you mentioned, Cheryl, when we think about woody ornamentals, the new cultivars tend to come out at a more methodical pace, let's put it that way. But are you seeing anything on that front that might catch one's attention?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about some new redbud cultivars that are coming out of a breeding program in North Carolina. So redbud is definitely a plant that we can grow well here, and some of the new cultivars are really neat. So there are some really cool purple-leaved varieties. There are some weeping varieties, and there's a brand new one. I don't know if anybody even has it yet, and we haven't tested it yet, so I can't tell you from a research perspective how it performs here, but I'm excited about it because it is a cultivar of redbud that has multiple colors on every branch, like on the same branch. It's called flamethrower. And as you can imagine, it's red all year long. Like during the growing season, its color is red. And then the tips of it are, I think, yellow, if I remember correctly. So there may be 2 or 3 different colors, but it's really striking. I've seen it in production at a nursery in Tennessee, and I know they finally have enough stock that they're beginning to ship it out. So hopefully we'll have some in Kansas in the next few years to test for you and tell you how they grow in Kansas. But it's always really exciting to learn about new cultivars that are coming out.
And those are just examples. What we'd like to do here is pass along Cheryl's guidelines, the things that one needs to think about in as far as selecting plant material, making sure that will work for them. And there's some basics here, Cheryl.
Sure. So while we are in this sort of downtime for growing things, it's a fantastic opportunity to prep and think about what you want. And that may range from sketching out your yard and thinking about what might fit where and how you can plug holes or fill the puzzle, to thinking about, where you might want to put something new, like a cut flower garden, things you might not have had before. And the very basics on that are checking your soil. So that's a service you can have done at your local extension office, and they'll give you guidelines and recommendations for what you need to do to it. So I would say a lot of our soils in Kansas are really high in pH. And so we have to choose plants that are adaptable to that. And whether or not you have plenty of soil fertility already, or if you do need to add something, or if you need to make different choices for a few years, it's really critical to check that first. And then you can spend your time dreaming about what will work and what will fit. And we have some wonderful extension resources. So we've got publications on trees, shrubs, flowers. We have a website called kansasroots.org that has a way for you to work through and learn about what does work here with pictures. So thinking about your space, your goals, and the best thing you guys can do is check out the K-State Garden Hour webinar series that we have started.
And expand on that. You are really enthused about what that brings to the table, Cheryl.
Yeah, so this is a wonderful program that we developed that really harnesses all of the expertise that our horticulture agents have across the state. So we started it in May, and it's been a weekly webinar through September, and now we're going monthly until the spring. We'll start up weekly again, probably in March, and they're very timely topics. There's an archive of everything, so you can watch everything that we have covered already so far. And our next one is going to be December 2nd. It's at noon on holiday horticulture. So you will really not want to miss that. It's going to be something to look forward to.
And once more, how folks can access that, where do they go?
So you can find the information on the department website for horticulture and natural resources at K-State. Click on extension, and then you'll find it under the Horticulture Information Center. It's definitely something you don't want to miss as we're walking into the month of December to close out 2020.
Very well. hnr.ksu.edu is where you start with that website and tracking down all of this great information as we, again, encourage our homeowners to look ahead to 2021, start planning accordingly for the horticultural projects you intend to take on. And that's good input, Cheryl, as always. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Nursery Crops Specialist with K-State Research and Extension, that's Cheryl Boyer, on this week's Horticulture segment. Once more, our time is away. Our thanks to you for being along with us. Please be back right here tomorrow. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.